Think about this for a second. In 2025 alone, the world bought roughly $3 trillion worth of oil. I mean, that is just a staggering number. But you know what's truly mind-blowing here? It's not the sheer volume of oil. It's exactly how we paid for it. Almost all of that $3 trillion was paid using just one single currency. And why is that? Well, it wasn't because it was fundamentally the absolute strongest currency, and it wasn't because it was the most stable either. It happened because of a deeply entrenched, yet entirely constructed, global financial system.
Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to guide you through this today because we are looking at what is arguably the most powerful financial system you were probably never taught about in school. The dollar dominance we see today? Yeah, that is absolutely not an accident. It's the direct result of a literal secret deal made right in the middle of the Saudi desert back in 1974. I know, it sounds way more like a spy movie than actual financial policy, right? Today we are going to unpack exactly what the petrodollar is, the immense power it holds over us all, and the monumental global shifts that are threatening to change it forever.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's our roadmap for today. First up, we'll look at the birth of the petrodollar. Second, how the machine actually works. Third, sanctions and the grid. Fourth, historical challengers. Fifth, the new de-dollarization push. And finally, we'll wrap up with gold, EVs, and tomorrow.
All right, part one, the birth of the petrodollar. So, to set the stage, ever since World War II, the US dollar had been reliably backed by gold. But by the 1970s, America was printing far more dollars than it actually had gold sitting in the vault, mostly to fund various wars in the Cold War effort. Well, other countries started noticing this math didn't add up, and they started demanding their physical gold back. So in 1971, President Nixon went on TV and just slammed the gold window completely shut. Overnight, the dollar was backed by literally nothing but trust. And then, 1973 hit. During the Yom Kippur War, OPEC launched a massive oil embargo against the US. Oil prices absolutely exploded, going from $3 a barrel to nearly $12. Gas stations ran totally dry. So now, America suddenly had extreme inflation, a currency with zero gold backing, and a desperate, urgent need for a new anchor. Enter Secretary of State Henry Kissinger in 1974 with what might be the ultimate sales pitch. He goes to the Saudis and says, hey, sell your oil exclusively in US dollars, invest your extra cash in US Treasury bonds, and in return, the United States will sell you top-tier weapons, protect your oil fields, and keep your nation safe. The Saudis agreed, the rest of OPEC quickly followed suit, and boom, the petrodollar was officially born.
Let's move to part two and see how this machine actually works in practice.
It basically operates as a brilliant three-step engine of global finance. Step 1. Oil is priced in US dollars everywhere. This means whether Japan or Germany wants to buy oil to keep their lights on, they have to acquire US dollars first. This creates a constant, totally guaranteed global demand for the currency. Step 2 is where the magic really kicks in. Exporters like Saudi Arabia were suddenly swimming in these massive, massive piles of dollars, way more than they could ever realistically spend at home. So what did they do with it all? They recycled them. They took those billions of dollars and put them right back into US Treasury bonds and American banks. And finally, step 3. America takes that recycled money and uses it to fund itself. It keeps US interest rates much lower, funds government projects, and ironically, finances the exact same military that's out there protecting the global oil fields. It is a completely closed, perfectly self-sustaining loop. For the average American back then, this meant cheaper mortgages, cheaper car loans, and a booming economy that was essentially being funded by the rest of the world.
Now, by the 1980s, this financial machine was humming along at full capacity. The dollar's share of global reserves climbed over 70%. This handed the United States an economic superpower that economists very politely like to call an exorbitant privilege. But if we're putting this in gamer terms, it's basically an infinite money glitch. By holding the keys to the world's reserve currency, America could essentially run these huge deficits, print money, and cleverly push a huge chunk of its own inflation onto everybody else. It's this massive built-in advantage that keeps the American financial markets locked dead center in the global economy.
Which brings us to part 3, sanctions and the grid. You see, having this exorbitant privilege, it isn't just about getting cheap borrowing rates. It is entirely about control. The dollar really isn't just money anymore. It has literally become the base infrastructure of global trade. Bank reserves, national debt payments, massive international transactions, they almost all have to run through this dollar system. So think about what happens if a country misbehaves and the United States decides to impose sanctions. They aren't just losing access to a specific currency. It's so much bigger than that. They are essentially being kicked off the financial internet. America can quite literally make another country's entire economy stop working overnight. It is just a terrifying, unprecedented level of leverage.
Let's look at part 4, historical challengers and their outcomes.
Because empires always face challengers, right? And history presents us with a really fascinating pattern here. Back in 2000, Iraq's Saddam Hussein made a huge announcement that he was shifting to selling oil in euros. Well, 3 years later, the 2003 invasion occurred, and Iraqi oil sales went right back to dollars. Later on, Libya's Muammar Gaddafi proposed creating a gold dinar backed by roughly 143 tons of gold to replace the dollar in African oil trade. But then, in 2011, NATO intervened, and that plan completely died. And looking a bit more recently, Venezuela, which happens to sit on the largest proven oil reserves on Earth, launched the Petro crypto in 2018 to dodge US sanctions. This ultimately culminated culminated in a 2026 U.S. military operation where Nicolas Maduro himself was captured. Now, we absolutely have to be clear here. The motives for every single one of these conflicts were incredibly complex. We're talking regional politics, severe human rights issues, and weapons. So we aren't drawing any direct, simplistic, single-cause conclusions. But as an observer, you just have to note the pattern. Historically, stepping up to challenge the dollar's supremacy has very often preceded massive, massive disruption.
Moving right along to Part 5, the new de-dollarization push.
Fast forward to today, and the global landscape is really starting to shift. But the true catalyst for this modern de-dollarization push, it didn't actually come from a military conflict. It stemmed from a massive, unprecedented financial freeze. In 2022, right after the invasion of Ukraine, the United States froze nearly $300 billion of Russia's foreign reserves and just cut their major banks right out of the SWIFT payment system. Literally overnight, decades of national wealth parked in a system that everyone thought was safe just vanished from Russia's reach. And look, while it absolutely hurt Russia, the unintended consequence is that it sent an absolute shockwave across the entire globe. Other nations watched this happen and suddenly realized a very scary truth. Your dollars are really only yours for exactly as long as the US allows it.
And talk about a domino effect. That realization triggered an immediate scramble. Major global powers decided right then and there that they needed a backup plan, and fast. China aggressively started dumping its U.S. treasuries, slashing its holdings from over $1.3 trillion down to roughly $600 billion. Russia and China began bypassing the dollar by pushing their mutual trade into yuan and rubles. Brazil and China struck new deals to settle trade in their own local currencies. India started buying up Russian oil using rupees. And perhaps the biggest, most symbolic blow of all, Saudi Arabia, literally the exact nation that helped build the petrodollar back in 1974, came out and publicly stated they were now officially open to trading in currencies other than the US dollar.
And we can see this isn't just tough talk from these countries. The math doesn't lie, and the numbers reflect a real measurable fracture in the petrodollar system. If we look at the US dollar's share of global reserves, back in 2001, it was sitting pretty at an incredibly comfortable 72%, but today, it has plummeted to under 58%. Now sure, this isn't a total catastrophic collapse by any stretch, but it is a crystal clear, undeniable downward trend. It proves that global central banks are actively, intentionally diversifying away from their reliance on the dollar.
And finally, Part 6, gold, EVs, and tomorrow.
So if they are moving away from the dollar, what exactly are they diversifying into? Well, central banks aren't just blindly throwing out treasuries. They are desperately seeking safe havens that cannot be sanctioned or digitally frozen by a foreign power. And what fits that bill perfectly? Central banks worldwide went on an absolute smog the dragon level hoarding spree in 2024, adding over 1,000 tons of gold to their national reserves in just 1 year. Gold is physical. It literally sits right there in their own local vaults, and it operates entirely outside the American financial grid. This massive shift toward tangible gold reserves is a direct, calculated response to the perceived weaponization of the dollar.
But hey, the fancy financial maneuvering, that is only half the story here. The other half is happening right outside your window, on our roads. In 2025, electric vehicles now account for 25% of all global car sales. Just think about that. 1 in 4 cars sold globally today doesn't need a single drop of gas. Why does this matter so much for our explainer today? Because the entire petrodollar system, the whole shebang, is fundamentally built on the world's absolute reliance on oil. As EV adoption rapidly accelerates year after year, that fundamental, desperate global need for oil is shrinking. And the math is simple. If the world doesn't need to buy your oil, they really don't need to buy your currency to get it. It directly threatens to break step 1 of that entire perfect loop we talked about earlier.
Okay, let's take a deep breath here and look at the actual reality of the machine today. The US dollar is absolutely, for sure, not dead yet. It still dominates a staggering 88% of all foreign exchange transactions, and it still accounts for roughly half of all global trade invoicing. Challengers like the Chinese yuan, they still only make up a tiny drop, about 2% of global reserves. There is literally no single giant rival out there, no euro, no crypto, no yuan, that is currently ready to just completely dethrone the dollar tomorrow. But for the very first time in 50 years, this system is facing what you might call death by 1,000 cuts. It's a multitude of smaller challengers, all slowly chipping away at the foundation.
Which leaves us with this final, highly provocative thought to chew on. For half a century, the US dollar and global oil have been locked in this perfectly symbiotic dance. But as emerging markets increasingly adopt this apes-together strong mentality to build their own alternative financial networks, and as green technology slowly but surely phases out our reliance on fossil fuels, we really have to ask, if the world completely stops needing oil, will it eventually stop needing dollars too? Keep that question in the back of your mind as you watch the global financial news play out in the coming years. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope and helped illuminate the invisible grid that powers our world. Catch you next time.